The Glass-Steagall Act by Trey White. On October 29, 1929, the stock market crashed, leaving Americans to suffer through the Great Depression. Part of the causes of the Great Depression was a weak banking system, a problem that Franklin D. Roosevelt wanted to handle. The Glass-Steagall Act, also known as the Banking Act of 1933, was passed by Congress in 1933 and prohibited commercial banks from engaging in the investment business. It was enacted as an emergency response to the failure of nearly 9,000 banks during the Great Depression. The act was originally part of Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal program. It became a permanent measure in 1945. It gave tighter regulation of national banks to the Federal Reserve System, prohibited bank sales of securities, and created the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, which insured bank deposits with a pool of money appropriated from banks. The expansion of commercial banks into securities underwriting was substantial until the 1929 stock market crash and the subsequent depression. In 1930, the Bank of the United States failed, reportedly because of activities of its security affiliates that created artificial conditions in the market. In 1933, all of the banks throughout the country were closed for a 4-day period, and 4,000 banks closed permanently. As a result of the bank closings and the already devastated economy, public confidence in the U.S. financial structure was low. In order to restore the banking public's confidence that banks will follow reasonable banking practices, Congress created the Glass-Steagall Act. Despite attempts to reform the Glass-Steagall, the legislature has not passed any major changes, although it has passed bills that relax restrictions. Banks may now set up brokerage subsidiaries and underwrite a limited number of issues such as asset-backed securities, corporate bonds, and commercial paper. The Glass-Steagall Act restored public confidence in banking practices during the Great Depression. However, many historians believe that the commercial bank securities practices of the time had little actual effect on the already devastated economy and were not a major contributor to the Depression. Some legislators and bank reformers argue that the act was never necessary or that it had become outdated and should be repealed. Congress responded to these criticisms in passing the Graham-Leach-Bilally Act of 1999, which made significant changes to Glass-Steagall. The 1999 law did not make sweeping changes in the types of businesses that may be conducted by an individual bank, broker-deal, or insurance company. Instead, the act repealed the Glass-Steagall Act's restrictions on bank and security firm affiliations. It also amended Bank Holding Company Act to permit affiliations among financial services companies, including banks, security firms, and insurance corporations. The new law sought financial modernization by removing the very barriers that Glass-Steagall had erected.
To do away with position limits on the futures contracts. The Republicans would have said, no way, that's completely inconsistent with any notion of a fair market, but the Democrats, I have a feeling, are just not financially literate enough to say no. And I think that Goldman has very shrewdly positioned themselves with the Democrats, because the Democrats typically, like many NGOs that I've run into, they seem to have a complete inability to comprehend these issues of markets and finance and how it relates to social justice. So under the Democrats, we also saw the repeal of Glass-Steagall.
Glass-Steagall said there's an inherent conflict of interest between the commercial banking side, which is the lending side, and the investment banking side, which is taking an ownership position. And we have to end this conflict of interest by separating these two entities. You can have investment banks and you can have commercial banks, but they have to be separate.
Do you think that the repeal of Glass-Steagall was a tragic mistake?
No, I don't think so.
You could be a commercial bank like Chase Manhattan, or you could be an investment house like J.P. Morgan, or a bank like Bank of America, or an investment house like Merrill Lynch. But you couldn't be both. And as the 90s went on, the screaming hyenas of Wall Street were demanding that this prohibition, this regulation, be abolished.